I do think that he has changed businesses. Again, it's way too early to sort of say that it's been done already, but he's changed the tenor, especially in the international arena. When you look at diplomacy, when you look at how we approach problems as equal partners, we're not forcing anything down the people's throat. And the interesting thing I want to show you is there was a congressional research report about a couple of days ago that came out that said that the lobbyist access to the executive branch has been restricted so much that this is like an unprecedented restriction of access. This is congressional research, so it's part of the nonpartisan congressional research branch of the Congress, which is the legislative branch. So they're actually recommending to the legislative branch that they mirror the policies put in by the executive branch to restrict lobbyist movement. So I think he started off great. It was a good step in. And the first thing he said is when he came in, when he set up his administration during transition, is I don't want any lobbyists in my White House. Now, granted, he gave a few waivers here and there, and I'm pretty uneasy about it. But overall, he's kept his promise, which is why it's taking a long time to fill a lot of these positions, because it's a thorough vetting process. And I think that's a good thing, because we want to make sure that our public officials have a least bit of interest, special interest as you possibly can, that they don't have any conflict of interests wherever they were working before they came into public office. And I think he's held that promise to a high standard. Well, there are things that I'm sort of uneasy about, especially when it comes to the war. He still contracts with Blackwater. He still contracts with XE. He still contracts with XE. I don't know how to pronounce it, but he still contracts with these people. He still has. He's still given into the huge military-industrial complex. Well, he had a victory with the F-22 where he cut that program, but he still has the huge military-industrial complex to deal with. So I think that's one of the problems that I have.
My answer is going to be pretty short. I think I addressed it in sort of my last response, but I don't really think that he has actually created this sort of idea of change, and I think it was just empty rhetoric during his campaign trail. I think the whole idea with the lobbyist movement, I think, despite what he says about lobbyists and special interests in Washington, it still goes on, and people are still finding ways to get around that. So I don't really think that as long as, if you have a Republican or a Democrat in office, that kind of stuff will go on. I don't actually think that true change is actually going on. And just going on what Bharat said, I think he does take on this huge industrial complex, and he hasn't really been doing to really change the sort of policies that America has been taking around the world. And as far as creating transparency within the stimulus bill, creating transparency with the cap and trade bill and the healthcare bill, I think it's clear that he hasn't shown that there is that kind of transparency. He's still trying to push his agenda through any means possible in Washington. I don't think he's actually doing anything to quote unquote change the way business is done in Washington.
Well, if by change we mean changing the president, and that he's not President George W. Bush, and yes, I suppose there's drastic change in Washington, because now we've got somebody else who's president. But that happens regularly in our history. If by change we mean that instead of having responsible people writing our bills, we're having people like Nancy Pelosi write our bills, and yes, I suppose that's change. I don't think that's a change we want. I don't think that's a change he promised or that the American people were expecting. A large part of the change was talking about bipartisanship, reaching out to Republicans and independents, and I don't think he's done that. I don't think President Obama looked to have any ideas from Republicans when he was writing the stimulus, when Nancy Pelosi was writing a stimulus bill. I don't think he was looking for Republican ideas. And cap and trade, he's not looking for Republican ideas. And all these different fields, and all these different issues, not looking for Republican ideas or independent ideas or conservative or libertarian ideas or whatever it is. Another thing is that he tries to be even-keeled, President Obama that is, tries to be even-keeled and have a good temperament when he's out in public. But then when you see him in front of fellow Democrats, he just is a totally different way. And I've seen him in so many videos insulting Republicans and insulting conservatives. And this one video I saw, Obama said, us Democrats, we think a lot. We like to think about our policies before we enact them. Them Republicans, they don't think at all. That's not going to get anything done. That's not going to help the situation. That's not what you said you're going to do. And I was, honestly, I was excited that perhaps something could get done in Washington, that maybe this new face, this new guy, the first African-American president could change Washington. But you know what, I guess I've been a little disappointed, and I think that the majority of American people have been disappointed. That's why President Obama's approval rating is now below 50% consistently in just about every single poll.
All right, so that'll conclude this section. We're going to have a 2-minute rebuttal for each debater, and after that we're going to take a 5-minute break, and I'll discuss what should be done during that break.
There's nothing I really wanted to rebut to or reinforce, but in my second point, I wasn't able to get to the issue of education. It seems like Noah and Barat do agree with sort of having this nationalized standard on education, but I don't think that's actually the right policy to take in this particular sense. I think, well, one, the No Child Left Behind Act was an unfunded mandate, but two, I don't think even if it was a funded mandate, it would actually do much to improving the educational system in America. I think you undermine the truly gifted students in America, and you don't actually address the problems that are occurring in the urban districts. I think the best way to take situations is on a case-to-case basis. I'm not saying that national and state funding should not exist within public schools. However, there should be less mandates on how it's done. The funding should still exist, but I don't think that you should have these standardized tests that really show the abilities of every student, because quite frankly there are situations in urban districts where this sort of policy, this sort of mandate doesn't actually work in Camden or in Newark, but it may work in some suburban district like where I live, Toms River. So that's why you need to give more autonomy to the local public schools. Well, I think merit pay and charter schools and vouchers do sort of have its merits. I don't think it would actually solve the issue of education. I think the only way you're going to solve the issue of education is if you create this sort of idea of autonomy into the local schools in which they have control over their own futures, and they have control over what kind of curriculum is being set in place, and they have control over how they're actually educating the children.
So the first issue I want to focus on is that part of the Bush legacy is that he left us with this horrible recession. That's true. But President Clinton also left the presidency with a recession. Many presidents do that. The lucky ones are the ones who do that. The unlucky ones, like George H.W. Bush, had a recession going into his re-election year. So when President Bush signed the tax cuts in 2001, 2003 into law, we were having tough economic times. By the time the tax cuts got into full effect, and by the time the effect had finished, we had 51 straight months of economic growth. That's an unprecedented amount of time in American history. There was no period in the 1990s even when there was a longer period of growth. Another thing I want to talk about is the idea of bipartisanship and whether Obama has done that. And I wanted to say that it's all right if he is not bipartisan, because the Democrats won the elections in 2006 and 2008. That's fine. You guys have a right to do things the way you want to do because you won, and elections have consequences. And we have the right to try to oppose it in every step we can and take every single step possible to try to stop those things from happening. But don't come in and say that you're going to be the most bipartisan president ever, that you're going to change the way business is done if you don't plan on doing it. And I don't think that anybody can honestly say that Washington, D.C. is more bipartisan now than it was during the Bush administration. And actually, I would say it was the other way around, that President Bush worked more with Democrats than Obama has with Republicans. You can just look at the co-author of the much maligned No Child Left Behind. That was Edward Kennedy, the late Senator Kennedy. That's just what I have to say, that Bush worked more with Democrats than Obama has with the Republicans. And you know what? Obama has the right not to do that, but don't say that you will.
I just want to make a couple of things. Okay, bipartisanship. What I want to say is he reached out initially to the Republicans saying, act as good faith participants, sit down, let's have a conversation and show us your ideas. And all they want is tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. If you don't want to talk about serious issues in a serious way, you can't just grab straws just because you're in a filibuster-proof minority party. You're basically having 40 votes in the Senate and you barely have 40% of your members in the House as Republicans. So basically, they don't have any power whatsoever. So they don't have any incentive to come to the table.